the 2D formation of it. 6 core strings they can easily get like core infinities on, they can work out, and then beyond that they can't because they don't even know the function of those strings. But I found 3 functions for the like outer ones, which are like boundary conditions of mirroring with holograms and circles and stuff. It's kind of complicated. But these 3 strings on the boundary conditions that I mapped to the outer 6, 3 functions I found were intent, the observer effect, memory, the information superfield, and then the narrative effect, which is like actually the divine narrative storyteller itself at like the top of the whole thing. And it's really interesting because like it fits with the classic ideas of Atman and lots of other spiritual systems where there's consciousness at the overarching top as the narrator, but it doesn't have self-awareness. The endpoints throughout the story, like Indra's net, are the self-awareness of that divine consciousness. And this gets trippy for me because, like we talked about math and causality violation rules, like the rules say you can't have self-awareness to that level. What does Genesis say about Adam and Eve? What they did that it made them have to leave the same level that God was on? They had self-awareness, and God couldn't have it. Causality violation.
JK Philly fan, what you got, bro?
Yeah, it's kind of like a repeat question that I went back and forth a little bit with Tupa, but I kind of wanted to direct it to Missile Man, and it's regarding the exact impact around 19 seconds when the missile or the object rotates within milliseconds. And I put a post in the pill. The object, because in the motion, if you take the relative motion before and after, it's just an abrupt change as if there's a frame missing. So, before you go down the whole time dilation and phase variance, before you could dive into that, there might be a more technical answer to it. Oh, I think Missile Man left.
Maybe he's sleeping.
Oh, yeah, let me see. Let me re-invite him.
I hope this is not getting glitchy just when it gets interesting.
That's funny. Elon's like, you guys are catching up too much.
For real.
This sphere actually is a great example to talk about first principles reasoning, because it's something I didn't even know what that word meant when I like got onto Twitter as an AI researcher like a year and a half ago. And turns out I'm really good at epistemesiology, which is like the process of asking questions before you form a final answer.
Real quick.
You got AIDS, brother.
That
really
sucks.
you down.
But I am curious, Steve. We haven't talked since this hearing happened.
Yeah, Tupa.
Big takeaways for you. Like, what stood out?
So yeah, holy. Okay, that's a doozy. I'm glad you asked that. First of all, I think the biggest thing that stood out was the submission of this video. I was just mentioning that I didn't expect this I didn't expect us to see this in the congressional record, just because there was like a whole lot of uncertainty, if you will, about, let's just say, the origins. From what I can understand, to some extent, obviously, there's no provable chain of provenance. Um, and so, however, though, what I do know is that the prominence, like the significance, is big. That's what I've been told, at least, or what I can tell, is that it's a big deal that this video is even out. And honestly, apparently, it really is the tip of the iceberg. But what was really super, super interesting to me, I think, was a few things. First of all, I think Dylan Borland carried the whole thing. Like, in many ways, he was an MVP. I think being able to talk about, yeah, I think being able to not just talk about his repercussions, but the fact that, like, here's what really stood out about Dylan, and also Wiggins' testimony too. Both of these things stood out a lot, but Dylan stood out particularly because he followed the opposite path to other people, right? Which is, you're typically convinced, like Commander Fravor, for example, right? You're convinced that, like, there is something else out there, or you're like Ross Coulthart. But then, you were convinced that something else is out there, right? And both Favor's case.
Naps day in the sun. I love that. I thought that was really cool. The pogo thing stood out as ridiculous. That was crazy, but cool. But whatever. I thought that as far as the committee or the task force goes, it was their most cohesive, well put together bipartisan effort so far, and I think it spells a lot of opportunity for more to come. People were worried they were going to stop doing this stuff or that the task force was going to get shut down, but I think they handled themselves pretty well today, and I think it's going to hope it keeps going. That'd be really cool.
Right on. That's awesome, Tupa. And look, like I would be very interested to know what would you like to see, right? And same with you, Red. That's the question for yourself too. Like, what are you guys seeing that you're like, look, the public needs to hear more about this, the good and the bad. I know that there's all the whole right, the whole CIFA stuff, the sort of
Yeah.
right counter.
That's piercing. Can you feel it? You can feel it, right? All that shit's in the conversations at the highest levels.
I think they need to squash the arrow thing right away. There needs to be clear answers
That's
about that. And with that, there should be a conversation about the harassment that has happened between like NASA, Nadia Drake, you know what I mean, Kirkpatrick, and so on, to figure out what that is and then to move forward. Because whistleblower protection is great, but if there's these rogue elements out there doing what they're doing, like what is happening there? Why is that happening? A clear assessment of the battleground or the battlefield to see what they're working against. I think that in some ways they're operating blindly, and possibly, you know, they're in out of their depth on some of this stuff. So they need to.
They're waking
that
up
out.
though.
Yeah,
Grosha and Luna both threatening to subpoena Lou Elizondo is not just random. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I don't think that's random either. Although it seems like what led to that. So it's good that we're talking about this. Because I was like, yeah, kind of just watching and observing from the sidelines and feeling like, hey, you guys need to stop this, you know, like all this back and forth. Yeah, you know, I think wasn't that mostly miscommunications though, or like, what are we thinking here? Like,
Was it though, or was somebody dodging a skiff with the FBI multiple times?
I mean, look, while that's possible, it would be impossible to do that forever. So I wonder what the strategy is, right? Like, let's say, like, there really is an intent to be, like, you know, discontent or be held in discontent. Eventually, like, that comes with prison sentences. That's why Luna wants to subpoena, you know, a lot of people here. I think she's just trying to get the liars in the room. I think what's happening is that Congress is finally waking up to the fact that there's this massive Toy Story, right, going on for like 80 years. And so they're really just trying to wrap their heads around. They're trying to figure out who's who, who's a good cop, bad cop. And I think they're realizing there are no good cops or bad cops. There are only cops here in this whole equation. Does that make sense? Like, I don't know if yeah. Like, it's hard to say, oh, yeah, this guy's clearly good for disclosure, clearly bad. Like, it's becoming very difficult. In some cases, it was very obvious who's, like, not on our side, though. So I will say.
Kilpatrick, right? That was crazy.
100%, but he may not even be some of the worst offenders. Like, although Kirkpatrick is pretty bad, I will say he has tried to follow the, you know, scientific method to some extent. You know, to the extent that was convenient. And the sphere, right, that he released, that was pretty cool. Right, the Mosul orb, I guess, or whichever orb that was.
Oh yeah, that one was actually super slept on. I think this is fucking
Massively slept on. That's still.
And he said there was a bunch of those all around the world, and that they didn't know what it was.
Dude, right? And then that like plugs into Patrick Jackson stuff, for example. You know, not all of his work